Hey, good evening, everybody. Chief Meteorologist Brad Petovich here, back in the saddle. We have got a lot to talk about tonight. It's a Monday, it's a holiday, MLK Day. A lot of folks celebrating the former civil rights leader, so hopefully you had a great Monday, but boy, do we have a lot going on. So we're going to jump right into it tonight with your weather impacts. Tonight, cold, and yes, the northern lights. We're going to talk a lot about that. Aurora borealis, likely visible in parts of the Carolinas. It's always kind of a if and when we're going to see them, but the potential is there. Probably the strongest solar storm we have seen since last year when we had vivid aurora borealis. So we'll talk about a lot of that coming up in a couple of minutes. Late week, a little bit of a warming trend after some cold temperatures early on, and then this is the talk of the town, really, potential winter storm. And normally I would not be talking about it this much this early, except we've got some pretty good confidence in something happening, and that something being a high impact. So that kind of combo is always one of those things where it kind of forces you to talk about it, because it's just not snow. That's the one thing I will emphasize. It's not just snow. This is an icy mess that could cause significant issues. So tonight, we've got lots of clear skies, maybe a few high clouds trying to sneak in from the west. Part of the reason there's a lot of confidence in the forecast for the weekend is there is a large reservoir of Arctic air. This is the most Arctic air we've had to use for a potential system all winter long, and honestly maybe for the last couple of winters, because the cold air is centered in eastern and central Canada, which is a much more favorable setup for us. So tonight it's cold. We've had these overnight lows in the teens and 20s. Tonight will likely be the coldest. As we go through the overnight hours, we'll see some really chilly conditions, and tomorrow probably a couple degrees colder than today. I think we topped out, I looked at the official high, I think it was right at 50. So we'll be a couple degrees cooler than that tomorrow, with temperatures in the mid and the upper 40s. But let's start talking about the weekend here, just to give you a sneak peek before I get into the Aurora. Possible winter storm, and I almost want to take possible because it's likely going to be a pretty significant winter storm for a large section of the Mid-South. The questions are the track and specifics. And what I mean by that is how much of what? Is it going to be a little bit of snow, a whole bunch of ice? A whole bunch of snow, a little bit of ice. I can tell you one thing, it's not just going to be one of those. It is not an all snow, all rain storm. This is going to have a little bit of everything. So stay tuned for updates as we go through the week, because I think it'll be very interesting to see how this unfolds. So if you watched any of my earlier shows on WCNC Plus or follow me on social media, we've got some space weather to talk about, and we had a huge solar flare yesterday. It was pretty big. We've seen bigger ones, but for whatever reason, the coronal mass ejection, which is the plasma or the energy that comes from the sun, in this one made a direct impact on the Earth, and it interacts with our upper atmosphere, creating all kinds of fluxes in energy, protons, electrons, and that causes issues with satellites, GPS, airplanes, the grid. The grid's been adjusting all day, trying to keep up with that, because it induces currents when you see this happen. But it also, for everybody that enjoys these things, aurora borealis. Pretty significant chance we're going to see that tonight. And this is borderline G5, which you don't see very often. So the KP index was supposed to peak at 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. It's already at an 8. And why is that important? You can see the 9 line. That's how far south you could see the aurora with a 9. So with an 8, we can clearly see it in the Carolinas. If you remember last year, we saw those 2 events where it was very vivid. Both of those were around an 8 to 9. So this is a very similar setup. So tonight, I do think that view line will drop pretty far south. Again, the further south you are, the lower it is on the horizon, the more likely you're going to need a camera to kind of check it out. And that's always the thing about this. You can probably see it with the naked eye if you let your eyes adjust, but your phone camera on night mode is going to do way better, long exposure. You'll see more detail, more vividness. James has got all our cameras kind of aimed in that direction. We've seen them with our tower cams both times last year, so the pretty good chance in the dark locations like in Dallas and Lylesville, we should have a pretty good chance to see them. In fact, I think last fall we saw them on all our cameras, even in the city. That's how bright they were. So we'll transition to the weekend. You know my winter weather forecasting rules. These date back. I had to look this up today because everyone uses these now, and I actually developed them, and I'm proud that everybody's using them because they're a great communication tool. But these rules I came out with almost 10 years ago, but they hold true today. 5 to 7 day range, things are trending up. Yesterday, we started seeing the pattern recognition, and honestly, the pattern recognition is about as strong as I've ever seen it this far out. The details are the thing we don't know about. Look at this dip in the jet stream. Now, that's not the polar vortex. It's a lobe of it over eastern Canada, but you see how far south that gets to the Great Lakes? That's a lot of cold air. That's the area of cold air and the location you would want to see it for snow in the southeast. So, if I were to put like a textbook, like, hey, here, everybody that loves snow wants to know, what do we need to get snow? This is what you need right here. This is the kind of cold air we need. So I actually think the cold air is not the question here. I think it's going to be more the storm track and the moisture. So right now, the winter weather chances for the weekend, remember, we're 5 to 6 days out. They stand between 50 and 70%. That is super high for this time range. And that shows you how much of the guidance. If I were to say, people ask me what model to look at, I don't look at one specific model, but it's very rare that every single one shows some winter weather. You don't ever see that in our area 5 to 6 days out. So the scenarios are pretty cut and dry here. Southern track means more snow. Closer to the coast track means more ice and rain. But there's not many scenarios that have all rain. In fact, if this is a bust of a forecast, it's going to be winter weather or nothing. I don't think we're going to see much rain. So I'll talk about this more later, but get those winter weather kits together, and that means having food and water for a couple days, backup heating sources. If you don't have that, make sure you have blankets or warm clothing, because this has a real big power outage threat because of the ice significance. So for a timing standpoint, we want you to be weather impact alert late Saturday through all day Sunday. Slick roads and power outages are our number one concern, so hazardous travel up there, but this is a legit power outage risk because of the amount of ice. So stay weather aware. You're likely going to have to stay home for a day, day and a half, and make sure you have some backup power sources to stay up to date. So tomorrow, temperatures, again, no worries tomorrow. This is why we're giving you a heads up. You've got 4 days to prepare for this after today. Your Jerry Hunt Supercenter 7-day forecast. And just to show you, whatever falls, going to be sticking around there. That's why Sunday, the high temperature of 29, the backside of this is really cold. We could see lows in the teens or single digits. So this is going to be a hard freeze behind the system. Stick around. We'll have more information on all this, a lot to talk about coming up in just 2 minutes. All right, welcome back, everybody. Chief Meteorologist Brad Penovich here. We've got a guest tonight from WFMY. Tim is off. I want to welcome in Alex Williams from WFMY. Alex, good to meet you. This is our first time talking. Tell the viewers a little bit about yourself. Where are you from, and how do you like working up there in Greensboro?
Yeah, absolutely. So super happy to be here with you all and with Brad Panovich. I've actually grown up watching Brad Panovich from across the mountains. So Northeast Tennessee is where I hail from, Johnson City. And so on the other side of the mountains, where northwest flow means more than, the cold air wedge that we deal with here.
Yeah, you're kind of stuck on the warm side when we get a cold air damming event, but you also get the benefit of that northwest flow snow. Mountain weather is amazing. That's awesome. Was mountain weather what kind of got you interested in meteorology, how crazy it is up there?
I would say just an overall general interest. I actually lived out in Scottsbluff, Nebraska for a few years early on, and of course they get crazy weather out there in the Great Plains. Blizzards, tornadoes, strong windstorms, gradient windstorms. So I think all of that, and then what really solidified it for me was the April 27, 2011 outbreak. I was a senior in high school, and that was kind of like, I want to help people and communicate weather information, life-saving weather information.
Wow, what an event. Yeah, that was a crazy event. That April, I remember in the Carolinas, for us, that was one of like 4 severe weather events in that month. It was a crazy month of severe weather back then. So let's get into tonight, because before we get into all the snow talk, which I think is like burying the headline, Alex, but I did want to talk about the space weather, because it's something it seems like we talked a lot about recently, and people have asked me about that, and I'll get into that in a minute. But tonight we have a legitimate chance to see the Aurora Borealis, and James is bringing up some of our cameras out there. We're not seeing anything right now, but we had a huge solar flare yesterday, and today the coronal mass ejection, which is basically part of the solar wind, the impact from that was affecting the Earth's atmosphere today, the upper atmosphere, and that interaction has created what we call a geomagnetic storm. And right now we're sitting at a G4, which is the second to the highest. We've been borderline G5, but when we get one like this, Alex, we tend to see the aurora pretty far south, and we had this happen twice last year, which was amazing. I don't know if you got a chance to see it, but tonight is another one of those nights that many people in the Carolinas might see that rare northern light.
Yeah, for once we're not dealing with the cloud cover. We're actually going to see clear skies tonight, so that should provide optimal viewing of the aurora. I actually didn't get to see it. I saw the pictures afterwards that people took with their phones. So tonight I am definitely looking forward to trying to capture some of that.
Yeah, I'm hoping, because we saw it on our tower cams, which was pretty amazing to see it on that. To kind of peel the curtain back a little bit, you see the graphic there. We look at a thing called a KP index, and you don't have to know what that means, but know what the numbers on the map mean. When we get an 8 or 9, that means the aurora is visible pretty far to the south. The last time this happened, correct me if I'm wrong, James, didn't we get like people see aurora down in the Bahamas, the Keys, Florida? It was crazy, and to think that today's event actually could have been stronger. In fact, I've got a friend up in the mountains in the Boone area. He's a big space weather enthusiast. He was sending me some great information today, James, and he brought up the fact that this was the 3rd strongest radiation storm that they have detected in the atmosphere since 1976, which surpasses last year's Mother's Day event. So this is a pretty significant event from a space weather standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, from the producer pod, I'm just keeping my eyes locked on our Dallas camera here just outside of Charlotte, because this is where we have seen it before. And we'll just tell people now, this is the general reminder. You have the power with your phone to do that long exposure photography that used to be exclusive to professional photographers. But you either got to put this on a tripod or lock it down on something, or at the very least, kind of fold your arms and hold it tight, because it's got to take the same picture in the same spot for 4, 5, 6, 7 seconds, brother.
Yeah, your human eye, you have to let it adjust. It does take time, but cameras are amazing. I mean, the crazy thing is you don't even need a tripod, James. Like normally when I do long exposure photography with DSLRs or old film cameras, you'd have to keep it really still. But because of the stabilization and the software in these now, you can stack images and make it look really good. So we'll keep a close eye on that. And I know it looks like kind of reddish there, but that looks like what we call air glow. Typically on our cameras, I can tell you, when we see it, you'll notice. It becomes pretty vivid. So we're pretty excited for that tonight. And I love to be, perfect at this and tell you when it's going to happen. But just like weather, it's an inexact science to tell you the exact time. It's just one of those things you got to go look or follow social media. And trust me, if people start seeing it, your news feeds will start blowing up with pictures and people going, go outside and check it out right now. So that's what's going on tonight, but I think we're kind of bearing the lead here, Alex, as we don't talk about this winter storm for the weekend. I think most people know I'm pretty conservative on winter storms far out because I know from experience how much can change. But this is a rare event that we have so much confidence and consensus in the guidance that some type of wintry weather is going to happen. There's still some details, but the other thing that has me worried is the impacts. This looks like to be one of those dreaded Carolina icy messes, and I think that's why folks are paying attention. And as we go into the weekend, this could be a real big problem for parts of the Carolinas.
Yeah, I mean, the American, the European models that we use, some of those, they're typically in disagreement. They're like fighting each other, right? But for now, they're in agreement. And that as meteorologists, that gets our attention because that says, okay, they're kind of picking up on the same signal here. Yeah. And I think, if we talk about this past weekend, Brad, we didn't have the high pressure locked to the north, as Tim has taught me, right? We need that there to spill and push in and lock in the colder air. It'll be there, it looks like, as we go into this weekend.
Yeah, and you probably didn't hear, but in my 10 minutes in an earlier forecast, I was talking a lot about that this is one time where I don't think cold air is going to be the problem. I think it's really about the storm track and moisture more than anything, because this cold air over eastern Canada, this is really cold air. We get kind of two blasts of Arctic air. There's almost a little lobe of the polar vortex, which is coming down into Canada. And you can see by the end of the week that big surge of cold air, it's not in central Canada. And for us in the Carolinas, when it's in eastern Canada, the Great Lakes and Northeast, that's like the prime location for cold air for our part of the country. So I don't think we'll be lacking for cold air. My concern, Alex, is like always in these cases, the depth of the cold air. I've seen situations where you got really cold Arctic air. It's like 20, 22 degrees at the ground, but we get a warm nose, which is warm air above our heads, and you get those dreaded ice storms set up. So that would be my concern, especially for us down here, probably more towards up you guys, probably more of a snow threat, but even a little bit of an ice risk. Down here towards the state line, it's always, man, are we going to see ice, sleet, or snow? And when we get mixing, and I'm sure Tim has told you, sleet kind of ruins everything. You tend to reduce your snow totals because the liquid's going to other things other than snow, so that reduces your snow totals, and you end up with a bunch of ice, which honestly is worse than all snow in my opinion.
Yeah, we definitely don't want to be dealing with ice storms if we can avoid it. And it just makes me think back to Memphis when they had the massive ice storm, and it was Arctic air that was locked in place, and then you had warm air riding up over that. Think of that cold dome forcing the warm air up over the isentropic lift. Yep. And we could see a similar situation set itself up over the Carolinas, unfortunately. So it does look concerning for sure.
Yeah, so let's look at the setup here. So I'm going to be full transparency here. I'm going to show you a piece of the European model, which, as you mentioned, I think I was looking today. I looked at the GFS, which is the American model, which Alex alluded to, but even the Canadian model, another global model that we look at sometimes, all three show some type of wintry weather in varying degrees. So what I'm showing you here is the European, and all that aqua shade, that's below zero temperatures in parts of Canada. And look how it moves down to the south and it spills into the mid-south. At the same time, we get this low pressure forming on the Arctic front. So the front kind of stalls somewhere to our south. That's the other thing. Where does the Arctic front get to before it stalls? A wave of low pressure forms along the front and then pushes east. And so what I did here is I didn't put totals, I just put precip types from the model and I overlaid them on each other. And so you see how there's green to the south, but look at all that pink. That pink is ice, usually sleet or snow or ice mix, in this case freezing rain, and then the white is all snow. So you see how that's very thin. It's basically around Charlotte. It feels like it's always Charlotte, right? It's like north side of town. It's like snow, south side ice. But just to put this in perspective, I'm going to do something kind of interesting here. I don't normally do this. I'm going to do it on the fly. I'm going to zoom in on this area real quick. And what I'm going to do is what we call grid adjust. So what I'm going to do is go into the model data, and I'm just going to move it, a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all three of these ice areas, and I'm going to move the distance here So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it north 50 miles, and I'm going to move it right there. That's what happens to everything. You could see, well, I didn't move the ice, sorry. We'll try that again. I'm doing it on the fly, so you got to bear with me. We'll move it 50 miles north, and you can see how the ice moves up towards Alex up in the Greensboro area. So that's just a 50-mile difference in the track of the front and the low. Let's move it back the other way to the south 50 miles. And you can see the snow line drops all the way down to almost Columbia. So Alex, this is our life on a daily basis that I don't think the public understands. Small, subtle changes like that, multiplied by 5 days, which is a pretty long time frame, can mean big differences in the forecast.
Yeah, I actually just did a weather IQ on that today, talking about the winter weather forecasting timeline and going through and kind of explaining to people. And my actual intro to that is it can be very tedious and often, very stressful for your weather team, because we're trying to pinpoint exactly where that line is going to be. Who's going to see the freezing rain? Who's going to see the sleet? Who's going to see the snow? And like you said, 50 miles. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, when we're talking weather, that's very small, and that's a small incremental change. And that means all the difference between, like you said, a massive ice storm or maybe some mix in there or even just the snow.
Yeah, and you think about that 50 miles, I did it all at once, but imagine it's only 10 miles a day change over the next 5 days. You get to 50-mile difference. So sometimes it's small changes multiplied by multiple days that end up making that impact. Now, something I want to bring up, because this is really important in the Carolinas, if we get an ice storm, Alex, it's a far different animal than just snow. I think snow, for the most part, I know a lot of people hate it, don't like driving on it. But honestly, for the most part, snow is a little bit easier to maneuver and get around. And when we get ice, we start talking about like infrastructure issues, like huge power outages, people without heat, which then leads to people trying to heat their home with alternate sources, and we get fires and carbon monoxide. So ice ends up being more of, like, I would say, a detrimental impact, has more of an impact on our daily lives than just snow. Maybe talk a little bit about some of the tips you would give people out there if they have to deal with an ice storm and have power outages going into the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. Ice is definitely the worst of the beasts that we're talking about when we're talking about winter weather, right? It decreases your traction on your tires, so now you're going to have travel impacts. It accretes on everything, metal, so your overpasses and bridges become slick besides the roads. You also get it on power lines and trees, and they start to weigh down, and then those tree branches come down. They take out power lines potentially. And we're talking, a few hundredths of an inch of ice here. It won't take much ice to really bring the Carolinas to a standstill. So what's the best thing you can do is you really want to stay home. Stay off the roads, as you see the graphic there, and plan for those outages. Make sure to have a way to stay warm. If you're going to heat your home with different types of sources, such as a generator, make sure it's outside. Don't bring the generator inside, because then carbon monoxide poisoning becomes something you're going to have to watch out for. And so you definitely want to stay safe with it. If you do have a generator, just keep it outside. Do not bring it inside your house for any reason. And then just have ways to receive, keep yourself warm, right? Receive alerts. And then also you just want to stay warm in that. Whether it's blankets, you want to check on the elderly or people and pets as well during these types of events.
Yeah, that's a good tip, and I was trying to tell people that today. If you have the ability to have a generator or some other backup source, that's great. I know that's not something that financially many people can do because it is a huge expense. But one thing you can do is, you just heard Alex talk about extra blankets, hats, other ways to keep yourself warm in your house. When we talk about power, living in the Charlotte area, obviously you have Duke Power here. They have a great group of meteorologists, and they do some pretty fascinating research. But one of the things that I saw them talk about is something called galloping on the power lines. And what happens when ice forms on power lines, we think it just forms evenly, but because of gravity and wind, you get something of a teardrop shape around it, and it creates galloping, which galloping is just the swinging. It actually sags them and starts moving around, and a half an inch of ice on a power line is 500 pounds of weight. So imagine that on a span between two poles. And so that's why typically that quarter, half inch area is where we start seeing issues with power lines in trees. And Alex, it's funny, they wouldn't tell me what it is, but they run some proprietary model for freezing rain over at Duke that lets them know exactly what amount of power outages they have. It's kind of cool data, but they're usually way ahead of the game. So if you see Duke Power kind of maneuvering their trucks around the Carolinas, that's a good sign that they know something is up. So that'll be something to watch over the next couple of days, because they will tell you whether or not they're going to have power. The other thing I will tell you, and I didn't mention this earlier, Alex, you made me think about this. When you get down power lines, tell your kids and you stay away from those things. I saw some crazy social media video today of a car driving over power lines and the tires catching on fire. It was wild stuff. I can't remember where it was, but I was like, it was a good example of why not to drive over power lines.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, very dangerous there. And I think the other thing we need to talk about, Brad, is after that, it looks like we're going to see an extended stay of that Arctic air. What does that mean? That means any impacts that we see winter weather, they're not going to be going away. It's not going to be up into the 60s. We're not going to get rid of it very easily. And so I think that's something to keep in mind. This is not just, maybe a couple day event. It's going to be a longer duration after that because of the impacts and because temperatures are going to stay cold.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I remember my first month here, I was in on the area. It was December 2002. We had about an inch and a half of ice in all the Piedmont, one of the biggest power outages in the state. And it was so cold afterwards, that was a big problem. More people got injured and killed after the storm due to fires, carbon monoxide detector, and hypothermia because of the prolonged cold. So really good point, and probably a very good tip right now is why you need to prepare this week. We've got 4 days. I know it seems like we're talking about this way ahead of time. It really is for us kind of really early, but it shows you the confidence we have in something happening, but also the impact that could possibly happen. So take the next 4 days, everybody, and get ready for this storm. So we're almost out of time. Alex, anything you want to leave viewers with and listeners tonight before we head out on this Monday evening?
I would just kind of say, keep your expectations low, right? Don't let the hype train get to you. We are going to continue to keep you updated with the most accurate forecast across the Carolinas, both here in the Triad and down in Charlotte. Listen to your meteorologist. Don't listen to social mediaologists who think they know about weather. Trust us. We're going to get you through this. We're going to give you the best information available. And we're talking serious because this is going to be a serious situation. So you do need to take it serious. You need to start planning now while we have nicer weather, quieter weather ahead of the impactful storm.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll see you back here tomorrow. Everybody stick around. More Plus coming up.